What is the worst thing you have seen at a wedding? I worked at a banquet hall for 3 years when I was younger, so I've seen my fair share of wedding disasters. I've seen the worst of the worst best man speeches, fainting mothers/fathers/groomsmen/brides, you name it, and I can't count the number of times I've walked in on people hooking up in the basement. But I've got one story that stands out the most. To start, I have to tell you that it was an Italian banquet hall. So almost all of our clientele would be Italians, typically marrying other Italians. No problem though, Italians like their wine and dancing and could get pretty rowdy, but they would always keep things under control out of respect for the occasion. But one time we had an Italian Polish wedding. This was an absolute disaster. As soon as the family of the bride and groom showed up, you could sense the tension between the fathers. I've never seen so many dirty looks tossed around in one night, but that was about all that happened for the most part of the night, and it was actually pretty amusing to watch. But then dinner and dessert had been served, so it was time to open up the dance floor. So, the drinks start flowing and everyone appears to be having a good time. Only one problem. The fathers are nowhere to be found. In comes an old Italian woman screaming, "They're fighting, they're fighting." And before you could say amore, the whole hall had emptied and everyone had rushed the parking lot. Outside, 400 people were swinging their fists anywhere they could. Italian men fighting Polish men, Polish women fighting Italian women. There were even some kids throwing punches at each other. There was nothing any of the employees or owners could do but watch and wait for the cops to show up. Cops came, people scattered, those that couldn't get away fast enough were arrested, and I and the rest of the staff were stuck cleaning up the biggest mess you'd ever seen. Needless to say, the wedding was ruined. So, when I was younger, we went to a wedding. I don't remember who it was for, except it was in San Bernardino and it was probably some extended family. My little sister, brother, and I were all young enough that we played in the bounce house and pretty much just hung out with all the other kids. At some point during the reception, my brother and I had gone inside and everybody was eating cake and ice cream. My little sister was still outside in the bounce house. Well, I guess the bride's uncle or something hadn't been invited to the wedding. He'd come anyway, tried to force himself in, had been thrown out, and then had left. Then he came back. He tried to force himself into the wedding again, and this guy escorted him out. My little sister was still in the bounce house, watching as the guy talked to the bride's uncle. Things got heated. I guess he really was not welcome there. And the bride's uncle pulled out a gun and shot the other guy. He attempted to shoot him in the head, the guy went down, he ran off. People heard the gunshot. It was a blur, being in the reception lobby, then all of a sudden seeing all these men with tuxes running outside. I ran outside with them. I'm a girl and was a little kid at the time, but I was curious. I hear screaming. I see them bringing the guy in, he's unconscious and bleeding from a wound in his head. My sister is freaking out. After they see that she was in the bounce house and ask what went down, she tells them what happened. She was absolutely hysterical. My poor baby sister. She was 2 years younger than I was at the time. They gave her sugar water and tried to calm her down while an ambulance was called. I don't think the guy died. I think the bullet more or less grazed him as far as head wounds go. But the memories are hazy, as again, I was pretty young. Maybe 8 or so. I was the best man at a wedding. I was standing next to the couple at the reception and the bride was tipsy, the groom was sober. She told him aloud, "I'm not really that in love with you. But I think you'll be a good husband." The look on his face sucked all the joy from me. He tried to laugh it off and told her to hush, but he was tearing up as they walked away. I was so sad for my friend. They are still married after 5 years, but I never know what to think about them and I've never spoken to him about it. Edit. Thanks to everyone for helping to bring my friendship back into focus. I'll be checking in with the couple to see how they are, he is, doing this week over drinks and dinner. Update. I just wanted to update this post, particularly since it's surprisingly one of my top posts. I had dinner this weekend with my guy friend mentioned above. After a few beers, I asked how they were doing. I also slipped in the memory of his wedding day and how it affected me afterward. He was pretty quiet for a while. I mean, we normally talk about pretty shallow stuff like playoffs and whatever geek tech is out. He said he's basically living a decent life, but she is in fact not truly in love with him like he is with her. And it's true. He is a good husband and she is a good wife in that she does every expected thing as a partner. He said they are like two friends who leave together. And sometimes have sex. So he figures that there are much worse ways to leave. They don't yet have a child but have planned on it and hope to someday. When they've each needed some support, mentally, financially, sexually, socially, etc., they try to help each other out, so that's been good. Bottom line. Is he happy? Yes. Does he wish that he was with someone that adored him as he adores her? He doesn't think that anymore because he's made his choice and it's at least not sad. So we drank a little more and I wished him a good night later. The worst thing I ever saw at a wedding was something I did. I was at a friend's wedding a couple years ago. It was me, my brother, and another friend attending together. Full Catholic Mass wedding, in a church with hard wooden pews. The service dragged on, and by halfway through I was bored out of my mind and not remotely paying attention anymore. In my boredom, I tried to relieve a little pressure and ease out a quick, silent fart. Well, it wasn't quiet and it wasn't quick. And instead of being covered up by loud music, it went off in a dead silent part of the service. No music, no talking, nothing but the fart. It bounced off that wooden pew and echoed through the silent church. We were sitting about 15 rows back and my friend getting married up front could hear it. You can hear it on the wedding video. My brother and friend stared at me in shock, and all three of us quickly started pointing at each other as everyone started looking our way, all of us beet red, all us trying not to laugh out loud. The three of us spent the last 30 minutes of the ceremony just trying to keep our shit together. We were all hunched over, staring at the floor, snorting as we held in our laughter. Just when we would get it under control, we'd look over at each other, see the other in a similar state and get set off again. We all looked like we were having a stroke trying to hold in our laughter. To this day, the thing everyone remembers about that wedding is my fart. I was in a relationship mercifully on its way out and her brother was getting married. The family drama was extreme. With my ex being excluded from the planning, primarily because she's a crazy person, along with lots of other perceived slights I had to hear each entire week-long story about. Then the groom got in a fistfight the weekend prior, for groping some chick at his stag, as it turned out, and showed up for pictures/videos with a swollen and scratched up face, etc. But that's not the best part. I'm a professional singer and I and my childhood buddy, also a pro singer and my piano accompanist, were asked to perform at the service and the reception. We presented a tasteful 50-song list of stuff we knew and waited, months, for them to get back to us. Finally, a week before the service, they gave us a totally different list of all the worst stuff you could imagine. After much negotiation, we compromised on a final list. The day of the wildly extravagant wedding arrives and we go to set up. The piano they'd hired turns out to be an uncle's 32-key Casio which they had set up in direct sunlight. It was an August wedding, and had given no thought to set up with the sound system. My ex got mad at her place in the procession and so wouldn't speak to her rich douchebag expat mother. The bride and groom were a half hour late for their own service while their families baked in the sun. My buddy was supposed to get an honorarium for his time and received a $50 gift card to Indigo Books and Music. So we both got pretty steamed and proceeded to get roaringly drunk off bottles of wine I continually pilfered from the bar. The camera crew, yes. Crew, was equally pissed off and they joined us in the wine, then smoked us up out in a field behind the hall. By the time we got back, all half dozen of us were on a tier. The crew made them take the most ridiculous photos they could come up with, all while the lead cameraman for some reason continually roared like a Wookiee. When the 12-course meal, yep. You read that right, came out, we got up and sang a couple tunes, pretty damned well, considering, and then proceeded to not eat and hit the bar. At this point, things get a little hazy. Things that definitely happened. My buddy took an 18-year-old cousin of my ex into the bathroom and all but banged her. My ex, who had 2 costume changes over the afternoon, yes. You read that right, having refused to be a mere bridesmaid, caught the bouquet and I laughed maniacally in her face and ran away clutching a bottle of wine. The camera crew quit, told the mother of the groom to go screw herself, and left without being paid their balance. I mimed freaking the back of the head of my ex's uncle who'd always been a douchebag to me, and we just generally caused a shitstorm. So, long story short, too late, I guess the worst thing I ever saw at a wedding was myself, and man, was it worth it. There's a long, involved, and disturbing backstory to this and I don't have time to write it out, but here is a snippet of what I experienced at a wedding. Great guy friend from high school getting married. We'll call him Slappy. The girl he's marrying has been awkwardly obsessed with me for years, we'll call her Crazy, yes. He knew about this. We're all part of the same extended group of friends. Trying to be a good friend, I agree to be at the wedding in a very minor role as an usher to minimize my interaction with the wedding party. This makes Slappy happy. At the wedding reception with an open bar, I proceed to drink heavily with both of their fathers, and commiserate about how this is probably a huge mistake. In the middle of this, the bride finally corners me and drags me onto the floor for a dance. I oblige because I'm doing my duty as a friend to Slappy. During this dance, while I awkwardly look over her shoulder to all of her relatives, Slappy's relatives, and our friends who are watching us slowly spin around the dance floor, I do my best to maintain a calm demeanor as she expresses her deep and enduring love for me. Also keeping in mind that my fiancé had passed away less than a year previous to this. I had to spend the rest of that song trying to, while somewhat inebriated, verbally dodge her fishing for reciprocation and also attempting to maintain a respectful distance from Slappy's wife who kept trying to maneuver closer to me. I don't think I could have been more relieved when that reception ended and I snuck out without running into either of them. The highlight of the night? Slow dancing with the bride's father who was gracious enough to snag a flower from one of the tables so I could hold it in my mouth. We were very, very drunk. Edit. I should know better than to write anything after working all night on little sleep. Sorry for the gender confusion. I am a guy. My grandmother got drunk at the reception and literally trash-talked my dad's new bride and her family in front of everyone. Of course Dad's not going to do shit about it and neither were my uncles, groomsmen, so somehow the responsibility falls on my 16-year-old self to corral her up and drive her home. On the drive back to her house, I hear more about my stepmother and her family, and then she starts trash-talking about my uncles and my dad, which I found hilarious as I don't get along with any of them. Finally, it's my turn and she starts talking about how I was an accident and still came out better than the kids she planned. Didn't know that but thanks I guess. She also got bummed out because she said and I quote, "I wanna tell you to marry a black girl but they all skanks and rats. Plus you's smart so you gonna have all kind of women sniffing you. Oh's well. Raise your mulatto children's right." After the most awkward drive ever, she had a few more choice words for me and my mother. I finally get her to her house and walked her inside. After that, I left and realized that I will never like my dad or his side of the family and developed an aversion towards weddings. My cousin's wedding. The bride's family was freaking insane. The mother of the bride wore a white cocktail dress with pearls and lace overlay that was scandalously short. She then went around complaining my aunt should have spent more on the wedding and that we were white trash, which is why she refused to pay for any of it. She claimed that she was, like the bride, and it was her day. She interrupted the groom/mother dance and ran onto the floor, gyrating in front of the camera and screaming for everyone to join her. My aunt had bought disposable cameras and set them on the tables for candid shots. I was 8 and taking pictures and she yanked the camera out of my hands and screamed in my face. I started crying and my mom threatened her if she ever touched me again. Her family stole a bunch of the cameras, food, party favors, and centerpieces, and told my aunt that they deserved them as compensation for the trashy wedding. They refused to let anyone have the other photographs or give out copies. The bride's family backed up her crazy mother during the whole wedding. The marriage sadly lasted only 3 years. The bride was dearly beloved by my family but her parents were tools and my cousin was kind of a screw-up at the time. Was at my aunt's first wedding. One of my distant cousins shits himself bad. He was only 8 or so, but he's sitting there in the pew, squirming and wiggling. I smelled something really foul, and assumed any one of the older gentlemen around me had farted. This was not normal excrement. It was bad. It was yellowy brown in color, and that kid must have been holding in for ages. I'm going to assume it was because of how tight his clothes were, or the wooden pew offering no resistance, but it shot a good way up his backside. He had a huge stain on his back and it was dripping off of him. His mother didn't even notice, or was pretending to ignore it, until he started crying. Apparently, they had no spare clothes and he had to sit naked in the car for a few hours until the services were done. I bet that was fun. I worked for a wedding vendor, so I saw some funny/strange stuff. One bride, who was a total elitist Karen, threw a reception party for 300 in Wyoming, decided to have a totally vegan menu. As you can imagine, this didn't go over well. The wedding was on her family's land outside the family house. The guests were like zombies overrunning the house looking for meat. They started up the grill and cooked themselves all of the father's elk and venison that they found in a freezer. The wedding already cost him an ass load and he lost a year's worth of meat on top of it. I was at a wedding where the bride and groom did a shot during the ceremony. They thought it looked cool, but it really put the white trash cherry on top of the borderline sundae. A lot of the guests decided an outdoor wedding meant shorts and t-shirts were cool, even though the reception was in a really nice banquet hall. And then the maid of honor used her speech to tell everyone that she wasn't that close to the bride and was surprised to be asked, to which someone from the bride's family remarked that the bride was a bee who didn't have friends, which is pretty much true. Probably the worst was the reception with no alcohol. Everyone awkwardly mulling around waiting to leave.